time is 6 p.m. Before we begin, commissioners, please put away cell phones. If you have personal business during the meeting, please move for a recess. If you are participating telephonically, please mute your phone unless you are speaking. Also, when speaking, state your name for those streaming the meeting. As a reminder to attendees, the meeting is being streamed live. The camera is located in the back of the council chambers above the clock. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Commissioner Seals. Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Seals?
Here.
Commissioner Sajal?
Here.
Commissioner Stafford?
Here.
Commissioner Seals, you do have a quorum with Commissioners Brown, Seals, Sajal, and Stafford present.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Sajal, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. Before changes are discussed, are there conflicts of interest to declare? If the commission would like to discuss anything under the consent agenda, such as the minutes, they need to be removed from the consent agenda and placed under new business at this time. Are there changes to the agenda? Hearing no changes to the agenda will stand as presented unless objection is raised. Next on the agenda are reports. Deputy Administrator Nygard, do you have a report?
Thank you, Commissioner Seals. I did provide a brief little report. There's a lot happening in the city right now. We've got some pretty nice permits coming forth in the next 60 days for approval of new commercial development. I think we're up to about 780 square feet of expected construction permits that will go through the process. We also submitted our first EDA grant for $1.8 million. That was for a disastrous recovery grant for the windstorm that happened in 2021. And so that was actually submitted with City of Palmer and the borough as co-applicants. We are also the recipients of $2 million for the Wasilla Palmer Interconnect. Thank you, Senator Wilson and Representative Tilton. That will be coming through the Department of Commerce here this fiscal season, so probably August. And then just an update, our 2011 comp plan RFP is on the streets right now. We had 26 plan holders, so a very good response, and that is expected to be awarded mid-August. Some policies to be aware of. The Matsu Borough did pass legislation, so we are eligible for 3 full pour license transfers from the borough into the city every decade. It was 1, and that was just a alignment with the state's policy. We have new hangars that are going up at the airport. If you haven't been out there, there's just a beautiful hangar going up on this side by General Aviation that will be housing about 18 mechanics, and then we've got a lot of construction on the expansion of the runway out to 5,100 feet, and then the last is this beautiful Title 16 product in front of you.
Thank you, Deputy Administrator Nygard. Do we have a report from our city attorney?
Thank you, Commissioner. Just very briefly, our office has been working frequently with the planning department to field questions from the public regarding zoning and land use issues as they come in, as well as questions from the code enforcement division as they arrive relating to planning and land use. Many of those have informed the Title 16 rewrite that's in front of you. I look forward to discussing that with the commission in more detail this evening.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing. We do not have any items scheduled for the public hearing tonight, so we move on to the persons to be heard. We are now at persons to be heard, a time for members of the public to share their views with the Planning Commission. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the Commission or administration. Anyone wishing to step forward may do so at this time. With no one wishing to speak, the next item of business is the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, please read the items for approval under the consent agenda into the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Seals. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have the minutes, our regular meeting minutes from May 14th of 2024.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Commissioner Brown moved to accept the consent agenda.
Commissioner Stafford seconds.
It has been moved by Commissioner Brown and seconded by Commissioner Stafford to approve the consent agenda as read. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Next on the agenda is new business. Will the clerk please read the agenda item under new business?
Thank you, Commissioner Seals. Tonight under new business, we will be having the discussion, consideration, and possible action on the draft rewrite of Wasilla Municipal Code Title 16, Land Development Code, that repeals and reenacts Title 16 to substantially change the uses permitted in each zoning district, the review, enforcement, and permitting procedures, the planned unit development, landscaping, parking, conditional use, and variance procedures, and the design standards imposed in the city. And that will be with Committee of the Whole. And as a clerk's note, this discussion on the draft rewrite is expected to be continued at upcoming Planning Commission meetings, and please contact the Planning Office after July 9th for updated information.
Thank you. Is there a motion to move into Committee of the Whole?
Commissioner Stafford so moved.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Sajal, second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Stafford and seconded by Commissioner Sajal to enter into the Committee of Whole. Are there objections to the motion? Hearing none, we are now in Committee of the Whole. The time is 6:08 p.m. Would you like to take it from here, or?
Sure, I can start by orienting us with a brief presentation about the Title 16 draft.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. So over the last several months, legal counsel has been hard at work in collaboration with city administration, the deputy administrator, and members of the council and planning commission, as well as members of the public and professional consultants to produce the draft that you have in front of you tonight. It's lengthy, but we believe in many ways constitutes a dramatic simplification from the existing Title 16 land use code that the city has been using for many years. Some of the feedback that we heard from council and from the commission that prompted the changes you see in this draft include concerns that Title 16 as a whole was hard to understand and needed to be reorganized, that include provisions which contradicted each other. Specifically, we heard that the landscaping provisions were onerous and should be substantially reduced, that the city should consider deregulating parking. We heard concerns about restrictions on short-term rentals and how they, on one hand, were challenging for property owners to comply with, and on the other hand, might present regulation on private property use that was undesirable or inconsistent with the direction that the city ultimately wants to go. We also heard concerns that different provisions of city code create different requirements, making interpretation difficult, or that the code was simply too technical to be practical. And we also heard concerns from members of the public regarding the interplay between permitting procedures and other sections of city code. So what we've done here is prepared an ordinance which dramatically restructures Title 16 into 6 divisions. We did this because we wanted the code to be approachable to members of the public. Some of the feedback that we heard was that it would be great if it could be something that a 10-year-old could understand. I don't know if we got there, but hopefully we got closer to that goal. The first of those sections that we've created is the general division, which presents overarching provisions that govern how the land use code operates. It includes purpose statements, intent, interpretation provisions, and definitions. If you have a general question about land use in the city, this is probably where you start. It'll get you oriented. The second division pertains to zoning districts. This is a division which identifies the general zoning districts in the city and the zoning map. It includes a chapter describing each zoning district, which lists out permitted, conditional, and prohibited uses by district. The third division pertains to overlay districts. This includes the downtown overlay district, which is presently the only overlay district that we have in city code, but also includes the flexibility for the city to create future overlay districts and to ensure that the existing downtown overlay district and its regulations remain separate from the remaining provisions of the city's code. The fourth division pertains to use and development regulations. This includes more technical provisions like density and dimensional requirements, public utility provisions, the Wasilla sign code, landscaping and parking standards, and finally, provisions pertaining to non-conforming structures and uses. The parking and landscaping requirements presented in this division in particular are something that we'll be discussing at length with Council and the Planning Commission. They are substantially pared down and we believe much less burdensome, while preserving the ability of the city to make sure that we've got standards in place that ensure this is a pleasant place to live with appropriate parking and landscaping requirements. The fifth division involves permitting and review processes. These include administrative permits, conditional use permits, planned unit developments, subdivision provisions, and the variance process. A major change that we've made here is deviating from the city's existing 3-tiered permitting structure to a more streamlined 2-tiered permitting structure. And what that looks like is, on one hand, there's an administrative permit, which is appropriate for most uses in most zoning districts. This is a permit which kind of resembles a checklist. Say, for example, you want to build a single-family home on a property that's zoned R1 single-family residential. That should be a permit that's relatively easy to obtain and should require the planning department to only confirm whether the application meets certain requirements. If it does, a permit will be issued. The second tier of permitting is a conditional use permit, which allows the planning department a bit more discretion to determine whether a particular use fits in with characteristics in a particular zoning district and satisfies other criteria. That's a slightly more involved level of review and is appropriate for those uses which should involve a little bit more attention from the planning department. Finally, the sixth division is administrative procedures. This is a division which pertains to appeals procedures and to procedures before the commission and an administrative hearing officer. This is also where we have the provisions pertaining to code enforcement procedures, fines, and provisions governing violations. Some of the feedback that we heard from members of the public that prompted grouping all of these things into a single division was, it was challenging for members of the public to determine how they could understand what would happen if they received a land use citation, what processes were available to them. So we've tried to consolidate those types of questions into a single place. This is a lot of information. It's going to take quite some time for council and for the commission to move through it. What we'd like to start with today is taking a look at the district use chart, which is on page 132 of the red line document in front of you. This is a use chart which works best read in conjunction with the definitions sections of this red line. And what it does is it walks through uses that a landowner could make of their property and the level of permit that's required for each of those uses. So you'll see, looking at this district use chart, that there's 3 types of labels that can be assigned to each of these uses depending on the zoning district the property is located in. One of those is that administrative permit. The second is the conditional use permit, and finally there's an X for where a use is excluded altogether. And what legal counsel has done here is try to anticipate some of the policy decisions that the commission and council might wish to make with regard to each use. But ultimately, these are legislative decisions that really aren't appropriate for council to make in a vacuum. So we were hoping to get the commission's input today on some of these uses in particular and whether the permitting designations that we've tried to anticipate here are appropriate or whether the commission would like to go in a different direction.
Do we want to go over this alphabetically?
That could make
feedback
sense.
that way? What was your intention for feedback from us?
I don't know that there's a need to go through line by line, and certainly that would be a very long meeting. I don't know whether members of the commission have had an opportunity to skim, and we could go roughly alphabetically if somebody wanted to start with a use in the A section and proceed that way.
Well, my first notice is how easy it is to look at each of the areas and automatically find out what is required to get started. So as far as going line by line, I don't think anybody here is ready for that tonight.
Sure.
But I really like how it's laid out, very easy to read. I think, and we'll give you some slack, it was a 12-year-old, not a 10-year-old. But I think even a 12-year-old could see this and pretty well figure it out.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Well, as the commission reviews either on its own time or in preparation for subsequent meetings, it might be useful to also take a look at the definition sections. There's 2 of them. There's a more general definition section, which I believe is located on, it's either page 9 or page 10 of this red line. And then there's another more specific definition section located at page 87. And these definition sections have primarily been revised for consistency with state and federal law, as well as to be more in line with what some other larger communities and growth-oriented communities in Alaska have done with their city codes. We want developers and property owners in Wasilla to be able to anticipate what the city will consider, various words to mean, and not feel like they're having to adapt to a whole new legislative or land use structure when they come to the city's code. We want words to mean what they're generally understood to mean in other communities.
What was the other page?
87.
87?
Excuse me, it's 77, my apologies.
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to, one of the things I noticed right away was, and it was one of the things I noticed when I started in this department, was it seemed like sometimes a definition might mean a teeny bit different in one area, or maybe not addressed in one area at all, and you would have to comb through a big document hoping you would find, using the search tools online. But what I've noticed is that it's very concise and it means the same thing across the board. And that's going to be very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, certainly. One area specifically which might not have a huge impact, but I think nicely illustrates that point, is we've made some changes to the definition of mobile home to more closely track state law. That was specific feedback that we got from members of the public. There was confusion about whether a mobile home was still a mobile home if it was taken off of its foundation. State law recognizes that if a mobile home has no wheels, is on a permanent foundation, is hooked up to utilities, and is registered in a certain way, that it's no longer a mobile home. It's instead either a single-family home or an office building or whatever its primary use is, depending on the circumstance. So our definition of mobile home now more closely tracks that.
I've got a quick question. If I was able to listen to last night's city council meeting, if there was a concern or a question raised there, I'm assuming there's no need to raise it again, that it's already being looked into or considered. There's no sense repeating anything they said, right?
Sure. I mean, we're closely considering all of the questions that we received at the council meeting last night and incorporating all of that feedback. If members of the commission have concerns about any of the positions that were articulated about that at that meeting, or different opinions, I'm happy to hear them, and I think it would be productive to have that discussion.
Okay. Mine was going to be around the mobile home issue as far as it's limited right now to R2 residential, and it seems like if we're making a push for more affordable housing, mobile home's a great option. I grew up in a mobile home. My parents retired to a mobile home. They lived in a very nice mobile home park in Oregon for 20 years. And so it just seems like it could be a viable option that for now is limited to just R2 residential and not R1 or rural, so.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Stafford.
Commissioner Stafford, you brought up a really good point. Last night, there was some discussion around rural residential. And it was implied, I think, when they did the last update, that you would have a larger lot, which would constitute rural. However, if you look at the map, some of the RR have been developed into the smaller lots. And so are they really rural residential, or are they R1, or are they R2? And so that's something that, if you look at it holistically, there's a lot of that are rural residential. And then if you go down on the zone, specifically more granular, you'll see these smaller lots. I don't know if that really describes what rural residential is, but the other thing is, if we have a developer come in that wants to do multifamily, they have to be contiguous to another multifamily or RM before they can even rezone. So you're right, there is a demand right now for housing and alternative housing because of prices. So it's just something to think about when we're looking at the zone. It's how realistic is it? We don't want to be bringing rezones back throughout the year when we can kind of think through it. The other thing is, how does this play into the comp plan? The comp plan is the compatibility use of these zones, but it's really important, I think, and you can correct me, Zoe, that the leadership at the city has a really good understanding about where this future land use should go, and then the comp plan are the users that will use that property in that way.
And that was part of the decision-making process that informed some of the calls that we made in this district use chart. Some of the feedback that we heard from the Commission and Council before the drafting process began was that we wanted to make those changes which were required either for compliance with law or for ease of use of this code, but wanted to leave flexibility for the code to adapt and accommodate any future guidance that the comp plan as revised would provide.
commissioners have any other questions?
Commissioner Brown. Yeah, reading over this the last few days and stuff, that, and you covered it, but that was one of my concerns is my previous time on the planning commission, it was quite noticeable that a lot of the things that had happened 20 years ago, the city had grown, had changed, but the people had not, a lot of people had not changed and stuff. So it appears you tried to write this, I think, with that in mind and trying to make it so it would be easy to come back and amend or change things without too much trouble because the city is growing and I see it growing even more. So what's ruled today will not be ruled 5 years from now.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Absolutely, we wanted this to be a living code provision and to give the commission and council the ability to, if policy were to change in the future or the city's planning needs were to change in the future, to come back and be able to easily revise it so that it would be a useful tool. One area where I think it may be helpful to get the commission's feedback is pertaining to assisted living homes. We've divided these into a few criteria or a few different categories here. Small assisted living homes, large assisted living homes, long-term and short-term. And what we've tried to do here is to create distinctions which track somewhat divisions drawn by landlord-tenant law. Long-term, for example, means guests or occupants are staying 30 days or more. Short-term means less than that. And for transient assisted living homes or short-term assisted living homes, this is something that we've allowed with a administrative permit in R2 residential or multifamily, or with a conditional use permit in RR or commercial zoning districts. And that was a policy call that we made because it seems like R2 residential or multifamily might have a little bit more traffic than other zoning districts. Is this a distinction that the commission agrees with or has strong feelings about?
Commissioner Brown, assisted living was one of the things that in the past have caused a lot of heartburn within the city. And I was looking for what chapter that's in because do you clarify the difference between medical assisted living versus substance abuse living?
I don't think that that's a distinction that we've drawn in this version of city code. And I think in general terms, that's a distinction which is nuanced and challenging to regulate in a way that accommodates the Fair Housing Act. Some individuals with substance use issues may have characteristics which overlap or are protected in a way similar to folks with disabilities.
Yes.
I know that this is something that Holly and I struggled with in preparing this draft. And I think the easiest approach is not to distinguish among those protected groups. But we can certainly discuss internally and hear any feedback on other approaches that might work in the alternative.
And I agree with that, and that's what caused some heartburn as far as the council, people coming before the council was that realizing you can't separate those out because usually substance abuse has other issues going with it, other issues that's protected by federal law. And so I don't know whether it's a way to write that in or to clarify that point, but it's something that has caused a big upstir in the last couple of years.
Yeah, we'll continue to workshop that issue and see what other communities have done and whether there's a different way to address that. But the draft we've presented here, I think, is consistent with most other codes that we've seen.
Cindy Wellman here. Can you expand a little, or maybe have a little briefing about home occupation? Give a little briefing on how that's going away or staying, or I really liked your definition regarding primary use and secondary use. I think that was what I was referring to, that it solved a lot of, providing that clarification was really helpful.
Sure, so some feedback that we got from property owners as we were working on this draft was that it was challenging to know when you needed a permit and when you didn't, particularly if you were doing, if you were using your home or your primary residence in a way other than as a home. A lot of folks, work from home now or will run a business out of a portion of their home. And so what we've done is we've identified that a home occupation is an accessory use of a property. And an accessory use is always going to be allowed, provided that it falls within the definition of accessory use provided by city code and that the property is otherwise appropriately permitted. One error that you'll see in the draft that's come before you is there's a row that's just marked home. That should have been home occupation. It should have been removed from the code.
I just looked at that and I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah, so home occupations now are provided that they are true home occupations and an accessory use, and the property is otherwise appropriately permitted, going to be allowed, and hopefully that should eliminate a lot of confusion from property owners. We want to encourage people to be able to make reasonable uses of the place they live.
Commissioner Stafford, I have a question on one of the definitions for correctional facility.
Sure.
It says used in whole or in part to house persons who are subject to state or federal government supervision as a result of criminal proceeding. So would that include someone on probation or parole? Because they're technically still under DOC supervision, or especially if they're on ankle monitor. Is this a standard definition that we grabbed from somewhere, or do we make a distinction there? Or, I mean, I see it's, that's different than a halfway house, but when you're out on probation, parole, you're still under direct DOC supervision for the term of your parole or probation.
That's a good point, and I understand how that could be a point of confusion. If you're out on probation, you're on supervised release under the custody to a certain degree of the Department of Corrections,
Right.
and there could be an argument that if you're the only person residing in, say, an apartment, that apartment perhaps falls within the scope of this definition.
Right, that would, the way I read it would fall in the scope of this definition.
I think that one distinction there might be that that apartment could be and generally would be used to house persons who are not subject to state or federal governmental supervision, as opposed to these types of correctional facilities or halfway homes, which are primarily used
Right.
for that purpose.
Yeah, I feel like I'm nitpicking, but I just would be concerned that someone out on probation being told, well, you can't live here because you're
Because
under
you don't have
DOC
a land use permit.
you're under DOC supervision.
Yeah, we'll look to other city codes and see whether we can't clarify that.
Appreciate that.
And Commissioner Brown, and that was some of the questions that came up with some of the group homes. There was people there for substance abuse, disability, and was on probation or parole. And so there was questions about how could they live in a neighborhood while on probation.
And I think that in interpreting these definitions, certainly we want them to be clear and to avoid ambiguity while possible. But also, there is an element of giving words their plain meaning and construing the words in our city code and to the extent possible consistent with the way that most people would read them. And I think also specifically when looking at uses in the district use chart, the use of a property will be evaluated based on its primary use. in the context of group homes, if it's primarily used as an assisted living facility, that would be its use regardless of whether somebody there happened to be on probation. Some other feedback that, that we received as we were preparing this draft involved small and large daycares. I know that a lot of folks have talked about, in the media and otherwise, there being a childcare crisis. So what we've tried to do here is to encourage small daycares with care for 25 or fewer children in most residential areas and commercial areas with a administrative permit in a hope of addressing that issue and making childcare more accessible.
I know there was quite a lengthy section on farm animals in different areas, and I haven't read the exact, I read the definition, so that's cattle, let's see, it's cattle, sheep, swine, goat, horse, mule, donkey, llama, and alpaca. So is there still a section that determines the number in this farm animal thing?
I do not know that off of the top of my head. I can take a look and report back at the next meeting.
That'd be great.
I believe there is. I just don't know off the top of my head what
I
that
know there was
specific
quite a
number is.
lengthy, well, I mean, very technical number of chickens, number of, you can't have this and you can't have that. And I was just looking at the chart here.
As long as I can have my rooster.
Sorry.
Commissioner Brown, one of the changes that this code does make is distinguishing between farm animals or agricultural uses and poultry uses. We understand that it's very popular for folks in many different kinds of properties now to keep poultry. And so we've allowed that in most residential areas with an administrative permit, and in multifamily, commercial, and industrial properties with a conditional use permit.
I'm assuming you, no, Commissioner Brown, I'm assuming that you do not allow exotic animals because it's a federal law against owning exotic animals.
That is an area that's closely regulated by federal law. It's also something that implicates significant safety concerns, and so we've followed in the footsteps of most other communities here and disallowed wild animals. If there are any members of the commission who would like to encourage tigers within city limits, we can research that issue and, and discuss, but.
Make me buy a high power.
Back in the 70s, Brown's Electric in Mountain View had lions at their A&W drive-in, so you could order food and go park in front of the lion cage and eat your burger.
Wild.
Commissioner Seals, the specific number of farm animals allowed for that use is on page 155.
155.
Yeah, that's where you get into 2 animals, 10 farm animals, and a 6-month-old chicken.
So these distinctions are based primarily on the acreage of the property. In the RR zoning district, agricultural animals are allowed initially on lots with a minimum of 2 acres total, and then on larger lots incrementally as outlined in this section. There are also agricultural animals allowed on smaller lots as well, in the R1 and R2 zoning districts.
Planning Clerk Wellman, did you have much feedback on junkyards at all within the city?
I don't know that that was one of the specific areas where we received a great
Okay.
amount of feedback.
Just curious. Thank you.
Do members of the commission have thoughts on that issue?
Commissioner Seals, I think we have enough junkyards in the city at this moment.
It's not designated as junkyard.
Commissioner Stafford, I know we visited this issue before. Is a kennel or cattery still defined as 6 animals?
Just saw that somewhere.
Did you? I was looking.
Uh, 157.
Yeah, I didn't see a number specified there on page 157.
So a kennel is defined on page 86
Okay.
as any premises used for breeding, buying, selling, keeping, or boarding 5 or more dogs over the age of 6 months.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So 5 animals.
And a cattery as well as 5 or more animals
Yeah.
over the age of 6 months.
Okay.
Commissioner Brown, did that address for, if you're doing it for pay versus a friend and I got 10 dogs over because I'm keeping them for friends at no charge?
I need to meet that person.
I,
Good friends?
Not that good.
What
Because that was a question that someone came before the planning commission before, was they wasn't charging, but they had exceeded the number of animals.
I think that use would still fall within the definition of cattery or kennel. And part of the basis for that is from a code enforcement perspective. It can be challenging or impossible for an officer to determine whether somebody's keeping 12 dogs temporarily or whether they stay there full-time. And so any property where there are 5 or more dogs or 5 or more cats would be considered a kennel or a cattery.
Commissioner Brown, I assume we get into it later, but the enforcement mechanisms for these different things. How would that address?
Yeah, we'll be discussing that extensively during, I believe it's the Division 6
Okay.
discussion. But we have endeavored to greatly clarify that process.
Commissioner Stafford, I've noticed the short-term rental has been greatly reduced as far as the language. And have we gotten any feedback from any short-term rental operators on any of that yet? I'm just curious.
Yeah, the changes that we've made have been informed by both permitting processes that we've observed over the last several years and feedback from members of the community. What we heard and what we personally observed is that some provisions of the city's short-term rental code, which we will discuss in great detail as we continue working through Title 16, seemed likely or possible to result in litigation or to create confusion for property owners. And so we've aimed to eliminate those points of tension in the pared down version of the short-term rental chapter that we presented.
Thank you.
With specific regard to the district use chart, you'll see on page 135 that we've combined short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts into the same row here. And that's because some of the feedback that we heard is that short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts are uses which impact surrounding properties in similar ways. And so we wanted to make sure that those would be permitted in similar ways and allowed in similar portions of the community. And that a short-term rental would not be subject to, say, a conditional use permit, where a bed and breakfast might be subject only to an administrative permit. And so the intent tonight in presenting this draft to the commission was to start a dialogue and highlight some of the changes that we've made, and to focus on the district use chart as an opportunity to begin introducing some of the themes and some of the changes that this draft makes from the prior version of Title 16. I know it's a very long document and perhaps ambitious to expect extensive discussion while we've only just begun reviewing it, but this is a conversation that we look forward to continuing at future meetings.
Is there any further discussion by the commission? Is there a motion to exit committee of the whole?
Commissioner Stafford, I move that we exit committee of the whole.
Do I have a second?
Commissioner Brown, second.
Been moved by Commissioner Stafford and seconded by Commissioner Brown to exit committee of the whole. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we have now exited committee of the whole. The time is 6:51 p.m. Move on to unfinished business, but there is no unfinished business, so we'll move directly to communications. Are there any comments on the communications item as presented?
I have one comment, that this is Clerk Wellman. I had spoken previously regarding the code enforcement log and how we were working to obtain a good report to be able to present. One of my challenges was to make sure that some of the items that were being reported on were allowed to be reported on, as far as whether it was a public record situation or our software doesn't differentiate. It just provides a report that these were all the violations, these were all the calls. So I had a conversation with Deputy Administrator Nygard, and her suggestion, we came to the conclusion of we're going to speak with the code enforcement officer to determine and work with WPD to make sure that any reports that we present are the standard. So that's why we did not have one this week, or this meeting.
Thank you. We move on to audience comments. We are now at audience comments, a time for members of the public to share their views with the commission. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Is there anyone present who would like to address the commission? With no one wishing to speak, we now move on to comments. Madam Clerk, do you have any comments?
Just wanted to thank everybody for coming out, and thank you, Ms. Eisberg, for coming out and representing us and providing this informative dialogue. It's a nice, very nice document that your office has prepared. And also that our next Planning Commission meeting will be July 23rd.
Deputy Administrator Nygard, do you have any comments?
Yes, I have a few. One is you could be the lucky winner of a trophy like this if you had a good float in our 4th of July parade. And because this is best music, we need some music next year. So, Melvin, you need to start recruiting some friends that sing, because this is a really good prize they could win. Anyway, we had 80 floats with the new route this year and got a lot of good, really good feedback about the route. And thank you, Mr. Brown and Mr. Seals and Sage Ellen Stanford. All of you volunteered to make it happen. I think they served 2,900 hot dogs, which was almost an all-time record. So that was great. So it's not too late to think about your friends that like to do floats, Mr. Seals. I'm sure you have friends that would like to do that. And the last thing is we're doing infrastructure tours where one day a week, Public Works and Planning are taking the commissioners and council members and employees around to show them the water and the wastewater, the airport, and some of our large commercial developments and the impact that your decisions are making in the city. So if you want to, if I haven't left a message for you, get a hold of me so we can get you on the schedule.
Is there a particular day that occurs on?
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
City Attorney, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to thank the commission for their comments on the draft Title 16 this afternoon. While we are proud of the draft we have put together, we are not too proud to receive harsh criticism and look forward to continuing to refine the draft with the commission's feedback over the next several meetings.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown, do you have any comments?
Yeah, if I may go back, the planning clerk, the permits issued, how does that compare to past years? Number? Do you have any idea?
That's also an excellent question in which Deputy Administrator Nygard and myself were, I guess, looking at some of the capabilities of our current software to find the best reports to be able to provide that information to you. It's coming.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been very busy though in the planning office, I will say.
I wouldn't know every time I come by, you're not there.
Commissioner Sajel, do you have any comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Ms. Eisberg, for putting this all together. And does that trophy come with cash stuff in it?
You can make it any way you'd like it.
And I ain't talking about fives and singles. No, I just look forward to how this plots along. It's we're getting somewhere. Slowly but surely. Thanks.
Commissioner Stafford, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do. I want to, of course, also say thank you for all the hard work put into this. I know it's been a huge process, and I'm looking forward to getting it all finished up and getting the final details hammered out. I did have a question for Ms. Nygard. We have a vacant seat on the Planning Commission. Is there any update on getting that filled? I know I've heard that it's been hard to get people to recruit.
I wonder why.
So, Mr. Stafford, I appreciate that comment. We have taken a very aggressive approach to recruiting in the planning department. Within the next few days, you'll see all of your pictures with your name and your term up on a very nice board when you come into the planning department. And one will say vacant. And so we have made it our mission to let everybody that comes in for a permit know that we would like to have them as part of it. So.
All right, I appreciate that answer. And did I understand last night's city council meeting correctly that they did approve the adjustment to the compensation for commissioners? Thank you.
My comment is that the city is going in the right direction. I've been watching the city go in the wrong direction for a long time. The work that has been done on this rewrite is going to make this city better for everybody. So I give my kudos to the deputy administrator and our attorney staff for all the hard work they've done to simplify this and make it user-friendly so that business can flow through the city. Thank you. With no further business at hand, I'm adjourning the meeting unless an objection is raised. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned at 6:59 p.m.
So they're gonna get paid $125 per meeting?
Per meeting. And then